All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about, as you can see here, the city-states of Athens and Sparta. They are the two most prominent Greek city-states that we get to talk about, and we're going to be focusing a lot on the differences between them because they are vastly different in the way that they are run, the way they're governed, the way citizenship is talked about for either one of them. Very, very big contrasts between these two city states. Perhaps the two of the single most important city states in all of Greek history. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. All right, the Acropolis. This is the center of any Greek city state. Doesn't matter if it's Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Argo, does not matter. So the Acropolis usually is going to have a temple dedicated to a deity, a god or goddess that is the patron god or goddess of said city. So, like for Athens, it would be the patron goddess being Athena. So the Parthenon there was built in her honor, the big temple. All right. Now, like an example would be like the Virginia State Capitol building, you know, in Richmond, or the U.S. Capitol building, as we see pictured here, that is in Washington D.C. All right, in the upper right corner, that is the Acropolis of Athens, as you can see it today. The really, really big building you see in the center, that's the Parthenon. Yep, and there it is again. Very beautiful ruins. If you ever get to go to Greece, yeah, I would highly recommend going to this location because it's one of those once in a lifetime experiences. All right, we'll be talking about Athens first. This is, you know, when you're looking at Greece, this is the Balkan Peninsula, northeast of the Peloponnesus Peninsula. So, looking at the map, the Balkan Peninsula, southeast corner, Peloponnesus. This is where Sparta is. It's to the northeast of that. All right, they're basically across the isthmus, the little stretch of land that connects the two land masses apart from each other. All right, so the polis, or the city and the surrounding villages. The polis is the Greek word for the city-state, or the city. Now, the center of the city is on top of the Acropolis, and that would be where the temple is to the local deity. And at the foot of the Acropolis, where all those main buildings are, is the Agora. That's the public square. That's the center. That's like the town center there. All the major business is going to be happening at the Agora. It's like the marketplace, the big congregating center for the city. The festivals would be held there, all that type of stuff. Citizens would be gathering there for dealing with public affairs. Like if there's going to be a vote, it's going to be held in the Agora, choosing officials, passing laws, all of these things. Okay? So, who were the citizens? They were the men of the city, uh, and they would be like the landowning men who were born free in the city typically. Uh, the males of Athens would be the only ones who would receive any type of formal education. If the wealthier you were for your family, you could have private teachers who would be, educating your sons. A lot of the education was picked up in the Agora, so there would be people there just teaching groups of, boys just, about life and government and politics and about, philosophy, all of these things. School would basically go from age 7 to 18, and their textbooks would be the Iliad and the Odyssey, all right? The two great works of Homer. And they're going to learn a lot of rhetoric. This is how someone speaks, to groups of people, the public speaking. It's a great skill to have, like if you're doing what I do, teach, or if you want to get into politics or you want to be in management, anything where you have a type of supervisor role. This is something that you need to have. All right. Now, when boys turned 18, their schooling was done, and they had a mandatory 2 years of military service to the city. All right. And before entering the army, they would swear this oath at the temple of Zeus, like with their fathers. All right. Now I'm going to read it to you. And this is what like any young man would say alongside his father, dedicating himself to service of the city. I will not bring dishonor upon my weapons, nor desert the comrade by my side. I will strive to hand on my fatherland greater and better than I found it. I will not consent to anyone's disobeying or destroying the Constitution, but will prevent him, whether I am with others or alone. I will honor the temples and the religion of my forefathers established. And that is the oath of basically joining the Athenian military. Basically, I'm going to protect my city and I will honor the traditions of my family and my people. Now, while all this is going on, the young ladies, they would basically be taught the duties of keep maintaining a house, all the quote unquote traditional women's duties, maintaining a house, being a wife and mother, all that type of stuff. The day to day comings and goings of having a family. Yes, that is very sexist by today's standards, but this was how things pretty much went up until fairly recently in just world history. So you have to just understand this was the times thousands of years ago. Even just 100 years ago, it was a lot more like this. Now, Athens went through several stages of how government was done for the city. Originally, they had a monarchy, so kings, passing from father to son, who's going to be in charge. They would have the aristocracy, who would be in charge, almost like the rich guys running things as like a council. There would be tyranny, where they would have tyrants or like a dictator type situation. During this time, it actually wasn't a bad thing, like we think of it now with guys like Hitler or Stalin, but it was actually more respectable in ancient times. Then they were the first democracy known in the world. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about this stuff. Now, the kings and the nobles, that one pretty straightforward. But tyrants, there were two tyrants that we get to talk about. Now, there's Draco, who would improve code of law, similar to Hammurabi's code, if you remember that from, Mesopotamia. If you stole a cabbage, you could be killed, as an example. Draconian law is what comes from this, meaning it's very cruel and very severe. Now, there's also Solon, who would promote trade and industry within Athens. A lot of political reforms are going to move Athens towards democracy under his guidance. So this would allow citizens of all classes, didn't matter if they were poor or if they were rich, to participate in public law and in courts. He was a very good leader, in contrast to Draco, who was a very cruel leader. All right. So from Solon, we're going to move towards democracy. This is where the whole idea of democracy, the people voting on how they're going to govern themselves, being involved in the government, comes from Athens. So the principles. Athens was a direct democracy, meaning every citizen has a voice and they have the right to speak. All right. It's in contrast to a democratic republic, which is more like what we are in the United States, where we vote on representatives to speak for us in the government. This was a lot more direct and to the point, so any citizen could speak up to the entire city with whatever thoughts or ideas or concerns they had about the way the city was being governed. Okay? So there's no stage of, don't call, they don't have the whole idea of call your congressman, make them work for you. You do the work yourself in direct democracy. All right, there's public debates. So if there is an issue that needs to be decided, like for example, say the gates of the city of Athens need to be replaced because they're getting old. There might be some people who are just like, well, why don't we just fix the gates that are already there? And there's people who are arguing for, hey, we don't even need new gates. There's nothing wrong with the old ones. And then there's people's like, yeah, we should probably just replace them all together because it would take too much time to fix them. So you're going to have an open debate between the citizens arguing to see, and then they would have a vote afterward, be like, okay, what are we going to do? All right, so then that comes to the duties of the citizen, which is to vote on the issues that the city needs addressed and to fight in the military when needed. So something to know about these city-states, every citizen is also a soldier. Doesn't matter if you are in Athens or in Sparta or in Corinth or in Argos or in Thebes. If you are a citizen, you can be called up to fight should the need arise. All right. So, like I was saying before, the citizens, they are the free adult males, and it is their job to and their right to participate responsibly in the city's government. There were no political rights in Athens for women, for foreigners, or for slaves. It's just how it was. All right, so now let's watch a quick little video clip.
A lot of people find democracy so beautiful they can't imagine it's not the natural state of all people.
We see Athens as this birthplace where people decide, instead of having a ruler tell us what to do, we are going to rule ourselves.
Democracy was this fragile experiment that could have gone away. The Athenians were being attacked by Persia, and they were given the choice.
It was either enjoy life the way they wished it to be or die trying. I think there is such great gallantry in the idea of going to battle, going to war, knowing you are severely outnumbered, but believing you have right on your side.
Imagine having the right to vote on whether to go to war or not. Vote yes, and you've committed yourself to risking your life to fight. Vote no, and you'll be safe, but you'll be ruled by a foreigner. Tough decision. But the point is, it's not being made by a king or a queen. It's being made by ordinary people.
Now, the ability to vote, of course, it's not everyone. It's primarily male landholders who can vote. Nonetheless, it's a dramatic shift.
And so the Greeks voted and did something that had never really been done in society before, with the kings and the pharaohs making all these decisions from the top down. This was a bottom-up thing.
When you decide to go to war, you are not fighting for some king. You're fighting for yourself. You're fighting for your family, for your fields.
The Athenians were standing their ground. They had everything at stake. They wanted their way of life. On the other hand, the Persian soldiers were being driven forward. They were conscripts. They didn't believe in what they were doing in every fiber of their being.
What would have happened to democracy if Athens had been overwhelmed and annihilated. That experiment, that brief, transient experiment in empowering people to vote for themselves might have completely been lost to history.
All right, so now let's take a look at Sparta. This one is located on the Peloponnesus Peninsula. It's that second chunk of land that is southwest of Athens, right in here. All right. Their economy is based on agriculture, and they had tons of slaves who are known as helots. Basically, they went over to one of their neighbors, a neighboring people, and enslaved the entire population. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty much how it was. They had this entire group of people who were enslaved. They did all the major work, building projects, all the farming and agriculture. So, yeah, it was pretty crazy. And what we do know with the Spartans is they're a very military-based people. And as you can see here, they would occasionally have war on their slaves to keep their population at a manageable and controllable number. So, yeah, it was also like a part of the rite of passage for Spartan soldiers, like the boys when they became men, they would have to sneak out of their barracks. They would have to sneak to where the slaves were and assassinate a helot man. It was like a rite of passage to kill one of these people. So yeah, pretty brutal. Moving on. So yes, all that being said, very military-based society. The Spartan men, all their goal in life was to be like a perfect soldier. And women's number one goal was to be the mother of soldiers. All right. Now, Spartans, they despised the other Greeks. Okay. These other city-states, they had these walls to protect them. Sparta did not believe in walls because they had a wall of steel. They had shields to protect their city because they boasted and had pride in being the greatest soldiers in all of Greece. Okay? And this is because they did not accept weakness. So if a baby was born unhealthy or had signs of weakness or deformities of any kind, they were left out on a hillside to die, to be eaten by animals or die from exposure to the elements, to the weather. And yeah, childhood, not very long at all. At age 7, boys would be taken from their homes and they'd be put in a military barracks to begin their military training. This is called the agoge. This would include reading and writing and the use of weapons and, building up their physicality. So now let's take a little look at what some of that may have been like.
From the time he could stand, he was baptized in the fire of combat. Taught never to retreat, never to surrender. Taught that death on the battlefield in service to Sparta was the greatest glory he could achieve in his life. At age 7, as is customary in Sparta, the boy was taken from his mother and plunged into a world of violence. Manufactured by 300 years of Spartan warrior society to create the finest soldiers the world has ever known. The agoge, as it's called, forces the boy to fight. starves them, forces them to steal, and if necessary, to kill. Constantly tested, tossed into the wild, left to pit his wits and will against nature's fury. It was his initiation, his time in the wild. For he would return to his people a Spartan, or not at all. The wolf begins to circle the boy. Claws of black steel, fur as dark night, eyes glowing red, jewels from the pit of hell itself. The giant wolf, sniffing, savoring the scent of the meal to come. Not fear that grips him, only a heightened sense of things. The cold air in his lungs. Wind-swept pines moving against the coming night. His hands are steady. His form. Perfect.
All right. So, continuing. By the age of 20, men became soldiers and were sent to the frontier, the boundary of Spartan territory. And they would be on the front lines for the next 10 years of their life. When they turned 30, they were expected to marry and start having families, start having sons of their own to be the next generation of Spartan soldiers. So they would spend their days doing military drill, being soldiers until the age of 60 when they were allowed to retire from the army. If they even made it that far, of course. All right, so now let's take a look at the role of women. They are brought up to be like this, to be healthy and strong like the Spartan men. All right, so female infants, they got as much food as their brothers. They were treated the same and they were trained in gymnastics, wrestling, and boxing. So yeah, the women themselves were pretty hardcore. Like if they were absolutely needed, like if the city was under attack, the women could be called up to fight right alongside the men. They were trained to be physically as close to physically perfect as the men were as soldiers. Okay. Now, Spartan women were supposed to marry at 19 rather than 14 like they would be in other cities, because the children would be born healthier by having an older, more matured mother. Okay? So they had a lot more personal freedoms as well in Sparta. So, they could go to the market on their own. They could go to dinners with people who are not members of their family. So, like, they could have a girls' night out. That was something unheard of in other cities. And as we'll see with a very, very well delivered line from the Queen of Sparta in the movie 300 that I'm in a clip I'm about to show you, why women were allowed some of these extra freedoms. Even though they had no part in the government, they still had social freedoms. Now let's take a look at that.
What message do you bring?
Earth and water.
You rode all the way from Persia for earth and water.
Do not be coy or stupid, Persian. You can afford neither in Sparta.
What makes this woman think she can speak among men?
Because only Spartan women give birth to real men.
Let us walk to cool our tongues.
If you value your lives over your complete annihilation, listen carefully, Leonidas. Xerxes conquers and controls everything he rests his eyes upon. He leads an army so massive it shakes the ground with its march, so vast it drinks the rivers dry. All the god King Xerxes requires is this, a simple offering of earth and water, a token of Sparta's submission to the will of Xerxes.
Submission. Now that's a bit of a problem. See, rumor has it the Athenians have already turned you down. And if those philosophers and boy lovers have found that kind of nerve, then...
We must be diplomatic.
And of course, Spartans have their reputation to consider.
Choose your next words carefully, Leonidas. They may be your last as king.
And water.
Madman! You're a madman!
Earth and water. But you'll find plenty of both down there.
No man, Persian or Greek, no man threatens a messenger.
You bring the crowns and heads of conquered kings to my city steps. You insult my queen. You threaten my people with slavery and death. Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. Perhaps you should have done the same.
This is blasphemy. This is madness.
Madness. This is Sparta!
All right. So now, Sparta's government. We have democracy in Athens. We have monarchies in other city-states like Corinth. Now, Sparta has an oligarchy. This is ruled by a small group. Yes, they had a king, but the king didn't have as much power as you might think. They would be like the military general on the battlefield and all, but most of the power was actually held by this small group. It was like a council, if you will. This assembly or council was made up of all male citizens over the age of 30. They would pass laws and they made decisions concerning war and peace. Each year, the assembly would elect 5 overseers for taking care of public affairs. All right. They could also veto legislation that people were presenting, so new laws. There would also be a council of elders consisting of 28 men over the age of 60. They would be the ones proposing laws to the assembly, and they served as the Supreme Court because who has more experience than the elder members of a society? and more wisdom. Now, the results of the militarism in Sparta would help them maintain control over their territory for a good 250 years. Now, with militarism, everything's focusing primarily on the military. So culturally, like the arts, like actual like crafting of art, music, writing, poetry, theater, all those things would be very, very lagging in any type of advancement. It would be rudimentary at best, or low levels. They would not embrace ideas of philosophy, science, or the arts because how's that going to help us be better soldiers? Now, when it came to the Olympics, they were some of the best athletes that would ever be in the Olympics because it played a mate to their strength, which is physical perfection. That's what the Spartans strove for. All right. So that is where we are going to leave off because there is nothing left to talk about today. Next time, we'll be talking about the wars of ancient Greece. So you're definitely not going to want to miss that, guys. All right. Talk to you next time.